It's my pleasure to introduce Patricia Kovatch, Associate Dean for Scientific Computing, who will introduce our last keynote speaker before Dr. Davis's closing comments. Patricia?
Hello. Dr. Sara Diamond is the president of the Ontario College of Art and Design, Canada's University of the Imagination. She holds a PhD in Computing, Information Technology, and Engineering from the University of East London, a Master's in Digital Media Theory from the University of Arts London, and an Honours Bachelor of Arts in History and Communication from Simon Fraser University. She is an appointee of the Order of Ontario and the Royal Canadian Society of Artists, and a recipient of the Queen's Jubilee Medal. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Diamond last night. And I was especially interested in her interdisciplinary background. I mean, I'm a computer engineer and supercomputer person working in a medical school, so it's especially interesting to talk to someone else who has such a diverse background. And she, one of the things that she said was that she strongly believes that the collective wisdom is different and better than that of the individual. So I look forward to hearing more about that. And the other thing she said last night was that even though she's in administration, she's still a researcher and her life isn't over. So I was glad to hear that too. So let's welcome Dr. Sara Diamond.
Well, thank you very much. It's an incredible pleasure to be here, and I want to really thank the organizers of SINA Innovation for inviting me and including me in your deliberations. I've learned a lot already. So, in a recent book entitled Rethinking the Contemporary Art School, I argued that the growing engagement with the sciences and social sciences suggest a different mission for the Art and Design School, its pedagogy, its faculty, and its graduates. I argued to a return to thinking before the 20th century of increased specialization, a time when art and artists and designers from many cultures were inspired by disciplines far beyond the humanities fields of literature, philosophy, or history. These engagements include mathematics, the sciences, and the emerging fields of social sciences. Now, in the last 2 decades, we have seen the rise of artists and designers who engage wholeheartedly with science and engineering and have become part of interdisciplinary teams. And science, in fact, may seek artists as illustrators or translators to make their research more accessible to publics or to clinicians. And artists may also hope to develop new tools or find inspiration in scientific theory. But increasingly, and this is really the subject of my remarks today, there is a shared instrumentalism and desire for deep team engagements by both the creatives and the scientists. I think artists and designers bring new perspectives and methodologies, and I want to share some of those today, particularly through the lens of a number of projects. And I think this is particularly relevant to the future of healthcare, of health, and of wellness in an era where we need to mitigate the movement from acute care, the incredible cost of healthcare delivery, and facilitate people to become preventative care givers and takers and to be able to move into communities with the appropriate kind of support. I would argue that artists and designers are fundamental to this project. Nigel Cross, in Designerly Ways of Knowing, argues for designerly ways of knowing and thinking, a science of design that is founded on the skills that designers have, I quote, in proposing additions to and changes to the artificial world. What does he mean by the artificial world? In this instance, it extends to all systems, including natural systems, where there is human intervention. In other words, designers develop concrete systems and products that respond to needs and possibilities. And the creative process needs to stay in the foreground as we invent the world in front of us. OCAD University's strategic plan emphasizes art and design as central and driving components of all forms of innovation and unique contributors to traditional research teams in healthcare research, rehabilitation medicine, engineering, and science. Our university has a very strong commitment to 5 contemporary themes. These are sustainability, diversity, technology invention, contemporary ethics, and health and wellness, bound together by interdisciplinary. In this sense, we're quite different from many of the existing art and design schools or faculties, even in comprehensive universities. The kinds of skills that artists and designers bring are visual thinking, pattern recognition, the ability to understand the importance of experience and pleasure, no matter how challenging the context that we are in. An understanding of embodied making, human caring, out of the box thinking, and the ability to translate complex ideas and often translate effectively across language systems. And it was really interesting to hear the presentations today and to just underscore how we speak very different languages that are very much embedded in our specific disciplinary training. And our methods are very different. And one of the great skills of designers is to bridge across those disciplinary silos and help us work with and understand each other. And I think one of the flips that is happening in the 21st century is to begin to understand all of our systems from the user's experience. And social media and the rise of social media has surely underscored how incredibly important this is when we think about the future of healthcare. So for these reasons, in 2009, OCAD University undertook a project that was funded by Canada's 3 research councils, and it was entitled Cultural Knowledge and the Healthy Society. It brought together healthcare professionals and researchers across many domains, as well as artists and designers. And it explored current and potential collaborations. It was an amazing event, and it was interesting to see the kinds of themes that emerged. And I know in the US there's a huge emphasis on STEM. In Canada, and I think this is fortunate, Industry Canada defines science and technology as art, the arts, the fine arts, the social sciences, the humanities, and the traditional STEM disciplines. And I would urge my American colleagues to think wide in scope as you move forward. So in any case, you can see some of the areas of research and interest that occurred at this really kind of seminal event, and some other examples, looking at, for example, the future of ambulatory care, which is really a major design challenge that can be facilitated by technologies, the use of comics and social media to support epidemiology intervention, art, rehabilitation, and mental health. So these are some of the issues there. So what I'm going to do a little bit here is talk about some of our research methodologies at OCAD universities and really underscore some of the work that has been undertaken by theorists of interdisciplinarity. And they have shown that results are different than the sum of their parts, not simply greater. So I think we need to understand that difference. And differences can lead to breakthrough discoveries and new forms of knowledge, tendering thresholds that result in new attitudes, expressions, and roles. Hence, the experience that students will gain in intensive collaboration with other disciplinary areas can be remarkable. Lili Diaz-Komonen, who studied the Media Lab in Helsinki, describes an environment that favors, and I quote, the acceptance of openness and indeterminacy to acknowledge others' agency, unquote. Gerhard Fischer, who designs tools for interdisciplinary teams, stresses the need for a complex and open context where collaborators can learn from their mistakes. And Diaz-Komonen also comments that finding common research goals as a process requires placing the tangible art, design, science, or engineering research project into a social and cultural understanding that focuses on, and I quote, context in which these objects exist and the communities and practices within which they acquire meaning, unquote. And such an exercise requires not only social and cultural theory, but empathy and imagination, skills that are part of the repertoire of trained artists and designers. So in our school, when we build interdisciplinary teams and we collaborate a great deal with industry, with researchers from the engineering fields, from healthcare and so on, we ask those teams, what is the user experience? We use all kinds of methods, from theatrical techniques, and I know you had some great discourse around theater yesterday. Personas, where you imagine the user. We build prototypes, and in particularly we sketch. And it's not only the artists and designers who sketch, it's the medical researchers and the engineers. We use sketching as a way of unifying a team and being able to look at very quickly different ways of visually imagining what an experience, a product, or a research problem would be. And some of the tools that we use are, as you've seen, strategic foresight, intensive think tanks, exploring all of the dimensions of a problem over time. A lot of in-class design problems, design forge method or a charrette, which means that you're very quickly developing quick solutions to a problem so you can place alternatives against each other. And then as you're looking at the path for a project, be able to think through strategies that always look at, well, what if this happens or what if that happens, and have that kind of effective way of managing a team. We have a very comprehensive lab system at our institution, well-funded, that allows collaborating researchers to hotel in our labs. Living together is of critical importance. I think my colleague from Georgia Tech just underscored that. And we try and live together both physically and virtually. So face-to-face meetings are very important for team building. No matter where you are in the world, I still think that human dimension of, how people are in the physicality of being together can then be augmented by virtual relationships that build over time. So, what are some of the themes that have come out of our research with the healthcare sector? And I have this slide to just give you a bit of a sense of the breadth of our collaborations with healthcare providers in the Canadian context, primarily in Toronto. We have our own Mount Sinai Hospital there. We work very closely with them. And some of the themes interesting, Lee, over a number of years as we've built these collaborations are wellness. So in other words, that pushing, increasingly towards preventative care and facilitation of well-being in a holistic way. Inclusive design, which I'll speak about, visual analytics, gerontology, I'll speak about all of these. Mobility, again, a topic in a moment. The built space, we have a school that combines landscape architecture, interior design, and architecture. A lot of opportunities to help to use design methods to train healthcare providers and just-in-time learning and support within core learning, strategic foresight, and cognition studies. And I'll come back to these. So I want to start sharing some of the work that we do at the institution and to give you an idea about how these collaborations play out. So one of our professors, Francis Le Boutillier, is a multidisciplinary sculptor and installation artist. He's the former chair of, in fact, our sculpture installation program. And he has designed, engineered, and fabricated training devices for teaching invasive prenatal surgical procedures in collaboration with researchers at Toronto's Mount Sinai Hospital and with Dr. Jan de Prest from the University of Leuven in Belgium. This project creates an accurate and responsive anatomical, clinical, and surgical training model that addresses in utero fetal surgery. For example, a model was developed to teach a procedure where the surgeon places a tiny saline-filled balloon in the larynx of a fetus in utero, and the procedure is now used to treat chronic diaphragmatic hernia. You'll have to excuse my excellent pronunciation of medical terms. This model is now being used, though, intensively in 10 teaching hospitals, and the image in the upper left shows fetal scans from University of Toronto's Division of Anatomy being segmented and transformed into usable 3D data. And the image in the upper right is a video of the 3D model developed from the MR and CT scans. In the lower left, there's a 3D print from the MR and CT scan data set. And the technology now is being commercialized with Javelin Technologies. I think what's interesting about this project is that Francis is really embedded in the labs at Mount Sinai. And over the 3 years of the process of working closely with medical researchers, his status has changed. I mean, he really kind of came in as almost an illustrator, and then as people there, and out of his own interest, and out of the incredible success of this research together, I mean, he really drove the use of new technologies and began with physical sculpting and then moved very quickly into using actual data sets. And now he and the medical research teams are co-publishing, and he was featured as one of Ontario's leading researchers last year. And I thought it was really interesting to see, and it's just a point I want to underscore, how it takes time and collaboration and translation to build effective teams between any kind of interdisciplinary group, but certainly with artists and designers. I want to talk a little bit about, and this is just a poster that was published. So again, just to underscore that our strength that we bring is design thinking and the kind of experimentation of art, the willingness to take risks and bring very strong visual methodologies to the challenges of healthcare. We have a really big focus at our institution in inclusive design, and it's the notion that inclusion is the full range of human diversity with respect to ability, language, culture, gender, age, and other forms of human difference. And the Inclusive Design Research Center, it's a 28-person research unit at our university, and it is comprised of healthcare professionals, medical researchers, designers, engineers, computer scientists. And its philosophy is that accessibility and inclusion are not only rights to be protected, but catalysts for new ideas, design principles that lead to better design, business strategies that make good sense, and economic drivers with ubiquitous social benefits. We lead a larger institute that's both provincial and international in its context, so provincial in the sense that it's our state, not provincial in a bad way. And we use that institute to be able to really develop some extremely exciting projects that are very much focused on linking people with disabilities to the internet and to, in particular, mobile interfaces with the internet. And the IDRC is also involved with standard setting at the international level. For example, working with the Obama government here in the United States to look at usability standards. People with disabilities continue to face exclusion from digitally mediated education, employment and social activities, and we see digital systems that can be personalized and reconfigured or transformed as able to address each individual's access needs at virtually no additional cost. So the research at IDI is involved in part in creating a cloud-based research platform to find and deliver resources and user experiences that match individual user preferences on a variety of devices. And what I wanted to do, these are just a number of the major collaborations with the and context that the IDRC has produced, but its partners are Apple, Microsoft, all of the large internet providers. One of the, I think, important pieces, again, of the IDRC's work, and I want to come back to this sort of flipped world where we need to think about user-centric design, is that they use participatory design in building all of their interfaces that apply directly to end users, people with disabilities, or other barriers, and engage the end user in the imagination and systematic design of technologies. So when we think of 21st century teams, and I haven't really heard this yet today, when we think of 21st century teams, we think the challenge, and this is a big challenge in healthcare, is to truly engage the users of the inventions and the systems, and at any point where there's a clinical interface, to rebuild our methods to include those users within the teams that we create. So in this instance, Tekla, which is a really exciting invention created by Komodo, which is a spin-off company now from OCAD University. It provides access to Bluetooth-enabled devices such as smartphones, tablets, and computers for those who are unable to manipulate them due to disease or disability. With Tekla, a user can take control of their computer or mobile device and use a familiar interface such as their wheelchair driving controls or adaptive switches. And it was co-invented by a disabled user who is a quadriplegic and the researchers in the IDRC, who are, as I mentioned, an extremely interdisciplinary team. Just another example of an interesting authoring tool which allows links to be directly placed into sign language videos on the web. We have a very strong focus on mobile experience design and research, and see great possibilities in using mobility, which really is about the capacity of individuals to use mobile devices to both navigate systems, learning, their healthcare, as being really a very transformative part of the current world that we live in. I'll talk a little bit about mobility in a second. I've been showing you some slides from Dr. Paula Gardner, and she works very closely with NeuroDev, which is a collaborative network of scientists who are currently developing meditation techniques for young people who have fetal alcohol syndrome. Again, engaging the young people and, when possible, their parents in the development of these meditation devices that are also gaming experiences driven, again, on mobile phones. One of the interesting outputs from our mobile lab, I'll talk about in a second, is a really great project that's called Qualia, and it's a game that uses EEG waves to augment the playing experience of players to help them, and this is the exact opposite of the first talk this morning, helping them to remain calm, focus on tasks, have collaborative emotional responses that are calm and reasoned and advancing the game narrative essentially through calmness. I want to talk a moment about our collaboration with Baycrest. This is a collaboration I'm particularly proud of, where OCAD University students and faculty have been working with Baycrest, which is a world-class gerontology center and a brain research center in Toronto. Some of you no doubt will know about it. And it's a very comprehensive partnership, everything from working on their Memory Link program and when the project BrainLab, which translated neuroscience research, and we're going to begin an institute that looks at culture and cognition, developing evidence-based research to understand the ways that experiences with art making and the kind of embodied nature of art making helps with both rehabilitation with people who have had brain injuries, and also helps people with Alzheimer's at various stages. One of our colleagues, Julian Goss, who's the former chair of our industrial design program, serves at the Baycrest Center for Geriatric Care as their designer in residence. And he undertakes projects such as thinking through and working on wayfinding, including collaborating with Alzheimer's patients to better understand what it is to move through Baycrest, which is a very complex environment, and develop wayfinding systems that also have tracking devices and data collection capacities to understand how people maneuver and make their way through the space, and really better support both the independence and autonomy of Baycrest residents, but also provide data to healthcare providers to better understand. In recognition of our multitudes of collaborations, we were awarded by Baycrest the Proud Partner Award last year, and I've now moved on to their board of directors in order to facilitate the relationship between my university and Baycrest, and we're looking forward to being able to co-appoint faculty at OCAD University and at Baycrest. A few notes on the Memory Link project. So this is a wonderful project. This develops memory scaffolding and a memory architecture that supports individuals who have first stage of Alzheimer's to be able to move through their day with images that remind them of their history and kind of evoke actions that need to take through that day, they need to take through that day. And again, just some images of our collaborative process, lots of prototypes that our students developed as part of the experience of building mobile devices that would support people with various stages of Alzheimer's. And again, working with brain-injured patients, working very closely to develop the kinds of devices and experiences that are needed. And this project now continues with elders, thank you, that are both at Mount Sinai and Hospital in Toronto and also at Baycrest. Brain Lane, a wonderful project where we were undertaking essentially translational work to help to represent and explain the work that neuroscientists do. So what is the brain? How does it work? What kind of patterns does it produce? And I just wanted to show you very briefly some of the work coming from, as I mentioned, the Design Forge and charrette work that we undertake in industrial design. And these are all projects that are with medical researchers and designers working, quite quickly to develop prototypes and concepts. This is one of my favorite. It's a really new way of thinking about how to create a cast using MRI scans and CT scanning, and then printing casts. So using a different way of immobilizing that really promotes mobility. And again, publication both at medical and engineering research conferences and also within the design world. And I think I'll end with this because it's a really beautiful example of a project. This is a project that, again, student and faculty developed, and it provides a device that allows you to capture the movements as they are undertaken. The movements provoke sound, and this project is now being used at Baycrest as a way of engaging people with first-stage Alzheimer's in moving, encouraging movement, and it's incredibly popular. The healthcare providers and researchers are really excited about it, and we are as well, because it has been effective in engaging older people in moving, creating an environment through their movement, and is really an example, again, of how that collaboration can help to think through and provide healing. So I just want to end by really suggesting that, artists work in speculative ways. We draw from technical methods with experiential, process-based techniques, as well as really engaging in iteration and studio critique. Scientists and social scientists are also speculative researchers, and the experimental tests of proof, mixing quantitative iteration and qualitative assessment, really are not that far away from both of our disciplines. Engineering and design are applied forms of practice where concrete outcomes are imagined, prototyped, tested, and revised, and increasingly we've crossed into complexity and social engagement. The combined power of these ways of understanding the world, of practicing, representing, embodying, making, and theorizing, are really critical to the future of success in healthcare and well-being. So thank you for listening to me today, and I look forward to collaborations and questions.
Any questions? I know I have one question.
Okay.
I was just wondering, you were talking about how the different you have all these different interdisciplinary teams are working together, the engineers, the scientists, the artists, the designers. And you said that they kind of speak different languages. How do you kind of bridge that gap and bring them all together to create one goal?
One goal. Well, there's been some really great ethnographic writing on essentially what are seen as, sort of boundary devices. And we spent a lot of time at the beginning looking at assumptions, trying to understand, what the problem is, and then literally picking the language apart. So we look at where we often may use the same word, but it has different meanings, and try and agree on the kinds of meanings you'll use as you move through the research. So I think it's about, kind of co-socialization. And one of the things that is necessary for artists or designers working in the health space is they need to have some, fundamental knowledge about the disciplines that we're working with. So we have a graduate degree that we're starting in design for health. We spend a lot of time ensuring that there's, enough background information and research for the designers and artists on a project that they can be intelligent contributors, but we also ask the same from our scientific collaborators. And I think art and design are often seen as black boxes or something that's very simple to do, and in fact there is a whole set of knowledge that we bring that also needs to be shared.
Sara, that was wonderful. It was inspiring and eye-opening, literally. I guess my question is similar to Patricia's. Where are the points of resistance to this conception, and where are the incentives?
Yeah, and there's certainly are points of resistance even when I think of projects that I'm involved with. I lead a large research network on visual analytics, and I work a lot with engineers and with our clients. And I'd say one of the interesting points of resistance when I was one of the founders of the network is I insisted that we work with real data sets and that we always have a client or a user who had a real problem involved in the research. And I thought it was very interesting. Maybe this is different from Georgia Tech, but my engineering colleagues they really liked to work with these data sets that they could find and that didn't present that human problem. So I would say one of the largest challenges is putting the human in the loop. And I think that's what designers are very good at doing, and I think that's a real point of resistance. I would say other points of challenge, I think of the many projects I've been involved with. Artists and designers like to have things make their way out to the real world. And sometimes with our science collaborators, publishing is enough. And we publish too, but we really like to get things out. And we actually have a big push at our school for commercialization, and that's not always welcome by researchers who'd prefer to kind of stay in the lab.
Hi, so we have a question on Twitter.
Okay.
What can science learn from the arts and social sciences?
Wow, where to start? Well, I think I provided a little bit of that. I think to understand what a visual world that we live in. So I've seen progress in my field, which is visual analytics, over the last maybe 5 years as designers and artists are part of teams. And obviously you have to have, literacy in statistics and in data, which we teach at my school, to be in that team, but that the visual communications capacity has gotten better and better, I think, for science, as science has integrated the skills of artists and designers in science communication. And I don't mean that only to the public. I think there's a tremendous amount of translation between disciplines in the sciences that really falters because there isn't an artist or designer in that picture facilitating what that image is, making it coherent. So I think that's a piece. I think I've talked a lot about putting the user in the picture, human centricity in that context. And I think artists and designers, frankly, in this era, bring in a very strong sense of ethics and social context and engagement. And I think that is true in some of the fields of science. I think scientists have moved increasingly to be more real-world centered, and I think we tend to bring that sense of groundedness and the desire to look at the ethical impacts of the research that we do. Those are just a few of the things I can think of. Thank you.
So hi, I want to thank you for your very interesting talk. One thing in science that we really battle is putting a value on fundamental research versus this idea of applications. So your institution, how do you balance fundamental art and design and the idea of finding an application for it?
So this is a great question. So we fundamentally support artists and designers who are individual talents and creators. We also do insist, though, that they have team experience, because we think when they get out into the world, they're going to need to be able to work collaboratively. But we have significant research at our school that I would describe in our areas as basic. But one of the great things that also happens in basic research by artists and designers is they like to break technologies a lot and look at how to remake and rethink them. And there's a line where that basic work can spill into applied research. And I guess part of my thinking is I don't accept those separations as easily as I might once have, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, especially in the digital or computer space. There's so much of a relationship between potential application and basic research that, I think that linear way of looking at research is not necessarily as effective as it might once have been. But I'm a very passionate advocate in my country, and I sit, because of a bit of a complex background history and research, I sit a lot on advisory councils for government, and I argue extremely strongly to support basic research. I think you have to have fundamental research supported if you're going to have, basic outcomes many years later. So I think there still is that path. At the same time, I think we need to look at how to think through something that's more engaged and circular, as we take fundamental research through that line. So I like to think of a line that has many circles that cross over around it.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Well,
Great.
thank you very
thank
much.
you. It was fun.